It started with a whisper, a single line of dialogue buried halfway through Revenge of the Sith. Have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? And with that, George Lucas dropped one of the most haunting ideas in Star Wars. A Sith who could cheat death, who could manipulate the Force to create life itself, who taught everything he knew to his apprentice before being murdered in his sleep. It's a story so small you could miss it, yet so powerful it changed how we see the entire saga. Because the more you think about it, the more it sounds less like a story and more like a confession. Palpatine wasn't telling a myth. He was bragging, admitting that the power he wields didn't come from nowhere. It came from the one master we never met. And that's what makes Darth Plagueis fascinating. He's the phantom behind the Phantom Menace. The mind that may have set every chain of events in motion, from Anakin's birth to the fall of the Republic. All from the shadows. All without ever lifting a blade. We've met the heroes, we've met the monsters, but never the scientist who tried to rewrite the Force itself. The one who blurred the line between creation and corruption, genius and madness. In this video, we're diving into the story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, how one background character may secretly define the entire Star Wars timeline, and why his tragedy might just be the most important story Star Wars still hasn't told. Darth Plagueis might be the most important Star Wars character we've never actually seen. One mention from Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith was all it took to launch decades of fan theories, novels, and speculation. Because that story, the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, wasn't just a creepy bedtime tale. It was a confession. Palpatine was talking about his own master, the Sith Lord who nearly broke the laws of life and death themselves. Plagueis wasn't a warlord or a general. He wasn't interested in flashy lightsaber duels or grand speeches. He was a scientist of the dark side, a manipulator of the Force at its most primal level. His obsession wasn't conquest, it was control over life itself. He wanted to master creation and immortality, something the Jedi considered impossible, and something the Sith believed could only be achieved through domination. In the Legends novel Darth Plagueis by James Luceno, we learn that he was a Mune, a species known for intellect and cold calculation. He lived among bankers and corporate elites, hiding his experiments behind the guise of respectability. And he studied the Force not as a religion, but as an equation, something that could be bent, twisted and solved if you were ruthless enough to pay the cost. What makes Plagueis fascinating isn't just his ambition, it's how close he came to succeeding. He discovered ways to influence midi-chlorians, the very building blocks of life, pushing the Force beyond anything the Jedi dared imagine. According to Palpatine, Plagueis could even prevent people from dying. That's not just power, that's playing God. But like all Sith, his downfall came from the one thing he couldn't calculate: his apprentice. Palpatine learned everything he could from Plagueis, and then killed him in his sleep. At least that's what he said happened. But the story is so conveniently tragic, so perfectly tailored to manipulate Anakin, that you can't help but wonder if that's the whole truth. What if Plagueis didn't die that night? What if he transcended death exactly as he intended, quietly influencing events from the shadows even after Sidious believed he'd won? That would explain why the Sith always seemed a step ahead, why the dark side seemed to grow stronger long after Plagueis supposedly perished. Even without that theory, the legacy of Plagueis echoes across the saga. His experiments could have created Anakin himself, subtly shaping the Force to generate a being born of balance, or imbalance depending on your view. The prophecy of the Chosen One might not have been destiny at all. It could have been the result of a Sith experiment gone horribly right. If that's true, it reframes the entire Skywalker saga. Every victory, every tragedy, every act of redemption, all of it could trace back to one Moon who decided the Force was a system that needed rewriting. Darth Plagueis didn't just alter the rules, he might have created the players. That's what makes him so compelling. He represents the one kind of villain Star Wars rarely explores, a thinker, not a destroyer, a philosopher of darkness who wanted to evolve beyond good and evil entirely. And for that reason, his story might be the most important untold tale in the galaxy. Palpatine might have been the face of the Sith, but Plagueis was its brain. He redefined what it meant to pursue power, shifting the Sith from brute force conquerors to long game manipulators. Before him, the dark side was chaos. After him, it was order through control. That's what made his philosophy so dangerous. It wasn't emotional, it was logical. He saw the Jedi as hypocrites. They claimed to seek balance, yet feared anything beyond their limited understanding. Plagueis believed that emotion and instinct weren't flaws, they were part of the natural flow of the Force. In his mind, the Jedi's repression of emotion was just another form of ignorance, and ignorance was the true darkness. That belief drove him to experiment, not just with midi-chlorians, but with politics, economics, and fate itself. He learned how to pull strings across systems, manipulating the galaxy through the same corporate networks that the Republic relied on. The Sith didn't conquer the Republic by force, they bought it. And that's exactly how Palpatine was able to inherit it so easily. Plagueis taught Sidious the art of patience, the subtlety of influence, the elegance of inevitability. When you look at the prequels through that lens, you realise the Republic's collapse wasn't just Palpatine's genius. It was Plagueis' blueprint, playing out long after his supposed death. That's the part Star Wars never showed us, and it's what makes his story worth telling. Palpatine was the fire, but Plagueis was the spark. The Phantom Menace didn't begin with Naboo. It began with a scientist whispering to the Force that he could control life itself. If Lucasfilm ever explored that story, it could transform how we see the entire saga. Imagine a film or series that blurs the line between horror and tragedy. Plagueis in his lab, surrounded by life suspended between existence and decay. He's not cackling like Palpatine. He's calm, collected, terrifyingly rational. The kind of villain who believes he's saving the galaxy by mastering it. And that's the beauty of him. Plagueis isn't a monster out of hatred. He's a monster out of conviction. He doesn't want to rule the galaxy because he craves power. He wants to rule it because he thinks no one else deserves to. He sees chaos and death as solvable equations, and his solution is control. It's the same ideology that later consumes Palpatine, Vader, and even parts of the Jedi Order itself. That need to impose order on something that was never meant to be tamed. In many ways, Plagueis is the mirror image of the Jedi. He's their ultimate consequence. When enlightenment becomes arrogance and wisdom becomes obsession, you get Plagueis. That's why he's not just an interesting character. He's a necessary one. He bridges the gap between philosophy and power, between creation and corruption. His story would remind audiences that evil isn't always loud or flamboyant. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and disturbingly reasonable. If Star Wars ever revisits Darth Plagueis, it shouldn't just be to show how he died, it should show why he lived. His story isn't about betrayal or revenge, it's about obsession. About the fine line between understanding the Force and trying to own it. And about how knowledge in the wrong hands becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. A Plagueis series or film could do what Star Wars rarely dares, explore the dark side through empathy, not to glorify him, but to understand him, to see how a brilliant mind, convinced he's doing the right thing, can spiral into monstrosity without ever realising it. That's the kind of tragedy that defines great storytelling. Think of the potential tone. Something between Andor's grounded realism and Frankenstein's gothic horror. A story drenched in candlelight and shadows, where science meets mysticism, and the Force itself becomes a living, reactive presence. It wouldn't need massive battles or cameos, just philosophy, fear, and the slow decay of morality. We could see Plagueis mentoring a young Palpatine, not as a villain and apprentice, but as a father and son dynamic. A twisted mentorship built on respect and quiet dread. The moment Sidious finally kills him wouldn't just be a betrayal, it would be the inevitable result of everything Plagueis taught him. The ultimate irony, creating the very thing that destroys you. But more than spectacle, his story could expand what the Force actually is. The Jedi see it as faith, the Sith see it as fuel. But Plagueis saw it as physics, a set of laws waiting to be rewritten. His failure could serve as the ultimate warning, that the Force isn't meant to be mastered, because it is life itself. And that's what would make it haunting. Because even after his death, the ripples of his actions would still echo. Maybe through Palpatine, maybe through Anakin, maybe through the galaxy's unending hunger for control. Plagueis becomes less of a man and more of an idea. A ghost embedded in every generation's attempt to cheat fate. Exploring him wouldn't just give Star Wars a great villain, it would give it meaning again. The saga has always been about cycles, about history repeating itself. Plagueis represents the cycle's beginning, the seed of all corruption disguised as enlightenment. Telling his story would connect everything: the Sith's ancient hunger, the Jedi's arrogance, the galaxy's endless fall and rise. All of it starts with one man who thought he could outsmart the Force. Maybe he did, or maybe the real tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise is that he was right all along.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.